In today's video, we're putting ChatGPT, the new AI program, to the test to see if it understands the world of Warhammer 40,000. From simple lore questions to building a full 2,000 point list, to recommending strategy and tactics. So can this new AI understand one of the most complicated tabletop games there is? Let's find out. So let's start with a really simple question. What is the Horus Heresy? So the Horus Heresy is one of the most famous things in 40k. It has an entire book series about it, and it has an entire game dedicated to it. So hopefully it knows what this one is. So when I asked this, I was expecting it to know, and it did a pretty good job. It knows it's a civil war inside the 40k universe. And then it has a few details, like Horus being the favorite son of the Emperor. So that's basically what you get from a Google search result. That sounds like something that would be on Games Workshop's website. But just to make sure that wasn't a fluke, I asked it to give me more detail. And then it went on and explained stuff like the damage done during the Horus Heresy would never be recovered by the Imperium, and it would basically damage it forever. So it seems to have a pretty good understanding of the big overarching topics of the Horus Heresy. So knowing these big overarching topics wouldn't be too bad for an AI. I was expecting it to get this part right. I mean, it could basically search Wikipedia and find this information. So let's see if it understands the tabletop game, because that's where it gets really interesting. So now I'm going to have it help me pick an army. So I did pre-record my screen for this and then write the script afterwards, but I didn't know if it would work. I was expecting it not to be honest. And for my Kill Team players out there, one thing with this AI is it was only updated sometime in 2021. I don't know the exact date. And the new version of Kill Team came out that year, towards the end of the year if I remember right. So I didn't think it would actually know anything about Kill Team, so that's why I went with 40k. And 40k is a more complicated game. If it can understand that, it could probably understand the list building in Kill Team. So I wanted to give it something to go off of here, so I told it I liked melee combat, and that I wanted to pick an army. And then it either suggested Space Marines, or Chaos Space Marines. Then it goes into some detail about what they are and why they would be a good fit. For example, it told me if I liked Space Marines, they have Assault Marines that have jump packs and lightning claws. And then it told me there's Terminators, which are very powerful in hand-to-hand combat. All reasonable assumptions if someone likes a melee army. And then it told me about Chaos Space Marines if I wanted to play something on the Chaos side. And it told me there's some specialist models like Berserkers and the Possessed Chaos Space Marines. So overall, those are two really good places to start. I personally was thinking orcs when I said that, but I'm an orc player, so I'm biased, so I just like my Xenos teams. But overall, this made sense. So then I wanted to drill down a level, because you don't just play Space Marines, you pick a chapter. So I wanted it to help me pick a chapter to play. For a melee Space Marine list, it recommended Blood Angels, saying they're good in hand-to-hand combat. Then it says Space Wolves. It knows their homeworld and mentions they have specialized models you can run. Then it says Black Templars are a good option with the ability to run Crusader squads. And finally, it says Dark Angels and running Deathwing Terminators with them, and how they're all about pursuing Chaos Space Marines. So I was thinking Space Wolves when I said that. So I was impressed it came up with that. But for all of those chapters, it justified it, told you a little bit about the lore, just enough where I knew it understood the lore, and then even recommended specific models. So if I was a totally new player and didn't know where to start at all, this program really would help you narrow down at least a couple of choices. And I appreciate that little blurb at the bottom about the best army to pick is the one that your personal preference aligns with. So I'm glad to know the Robot Overlord is a casual player. Now I want to see if it will build me a 2,000 point list. And I told it Space Wolves from the question prior. So I thought it would just totally fall apart here, or it would just blatantly rip off somebody else's list. But that's not what it did. And before we look at this, it is only updated to 2021 like I said, so a lot of the information going forward might be outdated, but I'm willing to forgive that, just because it is kind of a beta-tested program right now. And like I said, it's not current. So here's the list it came up with. Wolflord and a Rune Priestess HQ, 3 units of Grey Hunters, 3 units of Terminators, a unit of Wolf Scouts, and a Land Raider. So pretty basic, but solid. That's a sensible list. So it came up with a 2,000 point list, gave me point values for everything, and even gave me a little summary at the bottom. And like I said, point values might not be correct because it's outdated, but it did generate them. It understands you're building off of points. It says that it should be melee focused, and Grey Hunters were going to be the base of your build. And then it even says this will be an army that's really good against other armies that are weak in melee. So it will have that melee hand-to-hand domination. So my first thought is that this wasn't original. It basically found this on Google or some forum, stole it, and uploaded it. So what I did is I tried limiting the date range of a Google search and telling it from the end of 2021 earlier, look for Space Wolves list at 2,000 points. I went through the first 2 pages and couldn't find this. And then I specifically searched the description it gave me of what the list was. Couldn't find that either. So I'm not saying it's not out there. There's probably hundreds of 2,000 point Space Wolves lists on forums and stuff. So I could have missed it, but I couldn't find where it just stole this from somebody else. As far as I can tell, this is original. So now that we have our AI generated list, I asked it what to do for actually painting it. So it says to use a dark or navy blue for the base. Then use a light or pale blue for the highlights, while using silver for the armor and weapons. Then use brown for the leather and the cloth and paint the eyes red. So, where it starts getting really interesting is talking about strategy. So now that we had our list, I wanted to ask it about stratagems and secondaries, starting off with secondary missions. So it suggested priority targets, assassinate, big guns never tire, and headhunters. So I was a little confused when I first saw this because big guns never tire isn't a secondary, it's a vehicle rule. Well, it's not a secondary anymore, so I was digging just to make sure I wasn't immediately throwing out that result, and I found an old Adepticon article where it used to be a secondary mission you could run. It was one from 2015. So, like our list building, it's just outdated. That used to be something you could do. I don't know exactly if it was just an overarching mission you could run or a secondary or what the format was like, but that was a mission at some point. So the part where it starts getting really weird is talking about stratagems. So it listed some out and they sounded really good. I don't play Space Wolves, nobody in my group does. So when I first read these, I'm like, yeah, those all sound sensible. The names make sense. I'm like, it nailed it. It gave you some awesome stratagems to use. But then I decided I should probably fact check those before I make the video. While most of these sound really good, they're not real. Like, they're not something you can actually run, or as far as I could tell, could ever run. So I did generic Google searches on them. And then I went on Wikipedia and looked at 7th, 8th, and 9th editions for Space Wolves. So I could only go back that far. Maybe they were something way back, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th edition. I don't know how long Space Wolves has been a thing. But the first one was Howl of the Wolfkin, and I just couldn't find this one. I found stuff that was Howl of blank or something of Wolfkin, but I never actually found that a stat, like, tactic you could use. Then Grim Resolve is real, but it's Dark Angels. And the explanation they gave doesn't make any sense with that. It just found the name Grim Resolve, and then just took a generic sounding buff from Space Wolves and kind of mashed them together. So that's not a real thing. I couldn't find where you could ever use it as Space Wolves. Then from what I understand, Wolfclaw Strike is actually a detachment rule, so it's a special way you can run Space Wolves. So that's also not a tactic. I see where it got that from, like the name, and how it was kind of in the generic strategy part of Space Wolves, but the explanation it gave doesn't make any sense with it. So it's just completely inaccurate there. And then Wolfpack Tactics, I found some stuff back from 2013 that slightly referenced it. I couldn't find exactly what it was, so it was a real thing, it's just almost a decade outdated. And from what I've seen, I don't think their explanation for what it was correct either. So when it came to the tactics session, it is horribly off. It doesn't even get close. Like, the explanations make sense, and most of the time the names it used were real things, but they don't match up, and they're nothing even remotely current. I guess in my defense, I didn't tell it 9th or 8th edition or the most current Space Wolves list. So I think it just didn't know to imply, go with the most recent update. Which I know wouldn't have been the Ark of Omen or anything new, but if it would have been anything from 2018, 19, 20, 21, I would have given it that grace, but here it was just totally off. So I think it basically homebrewed these, I guess is the way to put it. Like, the thought process was correct, it just made up information. So overall, how did it do, and could you use ChatGPT to learn Warhammer 40,000? Well, at figuring out the lore, it does really well, and if you need help figuring out what faction to start with, it's really fast and gives you recommendations right off the bat that make a lot of sense. It can even help you pick out chapters and sub-chapters. So if you have no idea where to start, fact check everything, but it can get you started for sure. But if you want some of that nitty-gritty detail, like what equipment do I use, what tactics are the best, that level, it doesn't know what to do. I think that's a combination of it doesn't know the game in that level of detail yet, as well as it pulls stuff from different editions. So you might get something from 9th edition, but then you might also get a rule from 5th edition. And obviously it doesn't keep up with the meta if that's something you're concerned about. And you have to be aware it may just blatantly make stuff up, so always fact check it. So the data is outdated, and it won't replace buying the codex and reading through it, or talking to someone that's really knowledgeable about the game. But it does work. So overall, I was really impressed. I'm really excited to see where this goes in the future. I'm wondering if at some point it can replace something like Battlescribe, or even almost replace your codex to some level. So let me know what you think about all this. I thought it was really cool. I'm sure it will be years and years before it's truly, truly useful for actually running strategy, but I thought it was fun. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.